Breaking news around the world, a dramatic turn of events this morning for the Russian mercenary leader accused of launching a rebellion. The president of Belarus telling our own Matthew Chance that Yevgeny Prigozhin is back in Russia in St. Petersburg instead of being in exile in Belarus.
Now, this comes as Russian state media reports police raided Prigozhin's properties in St. Petersburg. Just last week, the Russian government had claimed it was dropping charges against him. During the raids, Russian police say they uncovered stashes of gold and money and wigs and guns and several passports allegedly belonging to the mercenary leader under different aliases. We've got team coverage from Washington to Belarus. Let's start with Matthew Chance in Minsk. You just spoke with the president, and you got an answer to the question that everyone has been wondering about the whereabouts of Prigozhin.
Yeah, and we were all absolutely shocked by the answer of the leader of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. You're talking to me from the Palace of Independence, which is one of Lukashenko's main offices in the center of the Belarusian capital, Minsk. And he called a few members of the international press around to hold what he said was a conversation about the events, the dramatic events that have been unfolding over the course of the past couple of weeks or so. And I asked him specifically, what could he tell us about Wagner, about the mercenary Russian group, and about its leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, who he had offered exile in Belarus in exchange for them calling off the armed rebellion that they staged in Russia last week. Take a listen to what Alexander Lukashenko had to say.
I wonder if you could provide us all with a bit of an update on the whereabouts of the Wagner leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Is he in Belarus or not?
In terms of Yevgeny Prigozhin, he is in St. Petersburg. Or maybe this morning he would travel to Moscow or elsewhere. But he is not on the territory of Belarus now.
Not on the territory of Belarus, which is something we did not know before this morning. Also, I asked him about whether Wagner forces, the fighters of Wagner, had taken up his offer and relocated to Belarus as well, because that was also part of the deal that Lukashenko offered. And he said, as yet, no Wagner fighters have come to Belarus, and he's not at the moment preparing any facilities to house them. And so it all kind of indicates or hints at the idea that this deal that was brokered to bring to an end the military uprising in Russia last week is now being reviewed. Perhaps the Kremlin is reviewing it, and that's backed up by the fact that on Russian television within the past few hours there's been new video put out of a police raid in St. Petersburg, the Russian city, of Yevgeny Prigozhin's house. And they found extraordinary things there: weapons, cash, gold, passports, some of which are said to have multiple identities of Yevgeny Prigozhin, and wigs as well, presumably for disguise. And it's sort of really discrediting the Wagner leader, and it does imply that there may be some kind of move against him by the Russian authorities. I've asked the Kremlin whether they can comment on that, but they have not got back to me. But when they do, obviously, Victor and Poppy, I'll let you know.
Matthew, on that point, in that conversation, the journalists you and others had with Lukashenko, he was asked what happens to Putin next, and he essentially said, what happens to Prigozhin next, and he essentially said, everything happens in life, but then seemed to say, don't worry, Putin wouldn't be dumb enough to have him killed.
Yes. Look, he was pretty non-committal about what happens to Prigozhin, and he said a number of times that he wasn't able to read the future, etc., etc. But he said, look, he does not think that Putin at this point would kill Yevgeny Prigozhin. But the fact that he brought that up, the fact that he even mentioned that as a possibility, I think led us all to sort of sit back and sort of take stock of the seriousness of the situation that the Wagner leader is now in. That you literally have, Alexander Lukashenko, the leader of Belarus, talking about the possibility, playing it down, yes, but talking about the possibility of him being killed by Putin. And so clearly, the indications are there are moves afoot at the moment. First of all, to discredit the Wagner leader, possibly in the future to take action against him, but who knows what.
All right, Matthew, stay with us, and let's bring in now CNN contributor and former CNN Moscow bureau chief Jill Doherty, and CNN political and national security analyst and White House and national security correspondent for the New York Times, David Sanger. Jill, let me start with you. The deal, in many respects, to save Prigozhin's life was that he would then go in exile to Belarus, and this was something that Lukashenko brokered. Now that he is Prigozhin in St. Petersburg, was there a deal? Is he going to be prosecuted after we see this raid? What's your read on this news?
It's priceless, actually. This we knew about a week ago when Putin said, by the way, the Russian government has given Prigozhin roughly $2 billion, and we hope not too much was taken, or kind of an indication. We knew at that point that the other shoe could definitely drop, and that Prigozhin could not necessarily be killed, but he could be prosecuted for corruption. And I think the play is working out exactly like that. This deal is essentially Putin's deal, with Lukashenko playing the role of trying to help Putin by creating this deal. It doesn't work, and maybe it was never supposed to work. So if Prigozhin now is on state television, or his apartment is, with money and wigs, et cetera, it's just an example of the government now, Putin's government, coming up with the proof that Prigozhin should be prosecuted. I think Prigozhin was too dangerous for Putin to allow to continue to exist wherever he was.
David, do you think President Lukashenko is telling the truth?
Well, Poppy, shockingly, we have been misled here. It was President Lukashenko who, in late June, said that Prigozhin was in Belarus. U.S. and Ukrainian intelligence has said since they don't believe he ever stepped foot in Belarus. And as we all discussed on this show a week ago, being in Belarus wouldn't offer him any protection from being assassinated, attacked, seized from Moscow. So that's been the first problem that he's run into. The second is that we actually think that along the way, Prigozhin here has proven himself to be too valuable in many ways to kill, as Lukashenko suggested, that you don't know how his troops would react and others. So instead, what you're seeing is that the Russians are systematically dismantling the Wagner Group. They've been moving some of the assets to other companies, friendlier to Putin himself. Some are reportedly going to Alina Kabeva, the former gymnast, who U.S. intelligence suggests is the mother of several of Putin's children. But she also runs something called the National Media Group. So you're seeing Wagner being folded back into government hold, which of course is exactly what caused all this to begin with.
Matthew, back to you. Is there any evidence, any indication even from President Lukashenko that Prigozhin was ever in Belarus? Does he even make that claim?
Well, I mean, beyond the facts, as David just said, that he said it a week or so ago, that Prigozhin was in the country. No, there's been no supporting evidence. We haven't managed to verify it. But the fact that he's backtracked now, I mean, is quite astonishing. But it does make a lot more sense, because one of the most incredible, unbelievable things about the way this whole military uprising ended in Russia a week or so ago was that this figure, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who effectively led an uprising against the Kremlin, was just allowed to walk away into what would have been a relatively comfortable exile, as we understood it, in Belarus. That just felt, unrealistic, didn't it, given what we know about what happens to people who cross Putin. They fall out of windows, they get poisoned, they get imprisoned, something negative happens to them. They don't just walk away from this. And Putin was absolutely furious about what happened, about this uprising, about being betrayed by Wagner. He spoke about it in terms of treachery. And of course, Putin's made no secret of the fact that treachery is not something he forgives.